Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you tonight on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Community Race Relations Coalition to this webinar tonight addressing how we learn racism. Our board felt that this is something that's really on everyone's minds right now, especially since the murder of George Floyd, that people are grappling with on an institutional level, but also on a very personal and individual level. What can each of us do? And so one of the things that we're kind of naturally examining within ourselves is how did we learn these things to begin with, and how did they become so much a part of our institutions? So tonight we're addressing how we learn racism. We have a wonderful panel of 5 people. One of our board members, Dr. Scheherazade Perkins, will be moderating, and I just want to welcome you and encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about the Race Relations Coalition, you can go to crrcwaco.org. And learn about us and join if you would like to. So Scheherazade, take it away.
Great, thank you so very much. And I ditto what our president has said, and that is welcome to each and every one of you. Good evening to the members of the Waco Race Relations Coalition, as well as our family and friends who've joined us. My name, as you've heard, is Scheherazade Perkins. I answer to Sherry or most things that start with an S. And I have the distinct privilege of serving you as the moderator for this evening's program. And let me just go on record as saying that we have an exciting program planned for you here tonight. Tonight we'll feature a dialogue with several distinguished group of panelists, and we will engage in the discussion, as Joe said, how do we learn racism? It's been said that none of us is as strong, is as talented, is as anointed, is as resourceful, is as smart as all of us. And we are only as strong as we can be if we exercise the ability to leverage all of our resources. But we will not leverage those resources if we don't first appreciate them. And we don't appreciate them if we don't understand them. And we don't understand them if we don't engage with them. And therein lies, I think, the mission of the CRRC, as well as the vision for engaging each of us here tonight in this webinar. From that, we hope that we will begin to understand more, appreciate, and leverage us as a combined resource for the community. So with that, I'd like to take a brief minute to introduce you to our panel. Now, I'm going to only say names and titles, perhaps, and as we get into the dialogue, I'm going to encourage our panelists to say as much as they'd like. Please don't take a text, don't come out of 2 Corinthians on me. But if you would say 1 or 2 things about yourself to help us understand in the context of our discussion, what you'd like us to know more about you. So we have with us Dr. Mia Moody Rodriguez. She is Baylor University. Can I call you professor? Would you say that you're a professor?
Sure,
okay,
yeah, professor
Baylor.
and chair.
And chair of the Public Relations and Media Department. Now, she's going to say more about that because I'm convinced that media has a lot to do with our thinking about one another. And so in the context of that, if you would share with us some of the work that you're doing, that would be helpful. We also have Ms. Cheryl, Luong. Did I do that correctly? Close enough for government work? Okay. She's the coordinator for outreach and inclusion, also at Baylor University, within the Multicultural Affairs Department on Baylor's campus. And I too am going to ask you, Cheryl, if you would share more about that assignment so that we can understand the context that you'll be sharing your thoughts and feelings and your understanding of this topic. Both of you, I'm convinced, have a research mind. And so if you have information about research that you've uncovered through your work, that would be nice to know as well. What I'm hoping is that we'll have a very, very balanced and broad perspective on the subject, and that we'll all leave here better off. We also have with us Mr. Charles Edward Francis of, get this, the metropolis of Ledbetter, Texas. Or I call him Elder Charles Francis, is a retired executive with the U.S. Postal Service. He's a former Army officer and the founder of Kingdom Men Ministries. Now, there's a lot more we could say about each of these people, and I'm hoping they'll bring out some of these things as they begin to share their perspectives. We have Mr. Dave Hill, who is an environmental professional, a registered professional engineer and geologist. He's in, get this, who's who in science and engineering, and the vice chair of the local spiritual association of Baha'i of Round Rock. I don't see William Parks, but he also is a panelist. And so when he chimes in, we'll add his picture. But for now, I want you to know that he's the superintendent or warden of the Giddings State School. And I know you heard me say William Parks. Something should be triggered when I say that. He is a descendant of the nationally renowned Miss Rosa Parks. And so I think that that will be an interesting addition to our dialogue as well. I hope I have not missed anybody. Have I missed any panelists? Please don't let me do that.
Nope.
Okay. Okay, very good. All right, so let's talk about how we proceed, if you will. I've come up with, I think, a few questions, only 10, but we only have an hour and a half, that we like to kind of engage our panel with. Some of the questions, we won't ask every single panelist every question, but we will try to be flexible enough to talk about what these panelists think are important things to discuss. So here's what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to start the discussion, and I think that the panelists will answer in such a way that may trigger additional questions. I know, having done this kind of thing before, that you as members of the audience are likely to have questions as well. But we got to control this thing, and we got to stay to the time frame. And so if you have questions, I'd like for you to put those in the chat, if you will, and we'll ask our president or our technical guru if they will manage or take a look at the questions that come in. What I don't want to do is to ask the same question 6 times. And so they're going to be looking for duplicity. They're going to be looking for questions that really do focus on what we want to bring out here tonight. And if for some reason we don't answer your question, we will zip an answer back to you after the close of this particular session. Okay? I hope that works for you. What I hope that'll do is it'll give us a chance to really broadly consider the subject, to consider all of the perspectives that are on this call, and yet give you an opportunity to share or to get some additional information as you need it. Why don't we start, let's see. I think that what's going to happen when I ask, with what race do you identify? Somebody's going to say, what is race? But don't let me get ahead of this thing. How about Cheryl? Should I call you Dr. Luong? Is that appropriate?
It's not. I have yet to earn such a title. So I have a master's of divinity. So minister, but not doctor. So
okay, that's fine. Not a problem. I just didn't want to presume anything. I wanted to ask. So would you mind sharing with us what race do you identify?
Sure, I will make this brief but slightly complicated.
Okay. On a complication.
Yeah, on a Tuesday, I would just say, I'm white, simply put. However, I am a card-carrying member of the Choctaw tribe of Oklahoma, and so that does broaden it a bit. Yeah, it's part of my identity. it became really complicated with Elizabeth Warren in the election. And there are parts of that that I don't claim, only because I don't feel like I have the cultural background to do that. However, my family does receive benefits from that. I received college benefits from that. I've been able to go back to Oklahoma for certain events and things. So I don't readily share that, because lots of people like to share that, and it doesn't necessarily have the same backing, but technically that is part of my history that I'm still trying to figure out.
Okay, fabulous answer. Thank you for that. Because you named two, I'm curious about how you came to learn what your race was. Who told you that your race was white or Choctaw, as the case may be?
Well, I think as a person that's white presenting, some people would use the phrase white passing. Everyone else tells you that's social identity. But my grandmother on the side that is Choctaw would tell me stories. Like, I would spend the night at her house and she would tell me stories while she brushed my hair, and she would braid my hair. And had a lot of artwork in her house. If you saw her, you would say, yeah, I see it. If you saw my dad, you would say, yeah, I see it, just physical features. And then it later on, as family was looking at colleges and finances, found out that we had all of the paperwork that we had. There are people who are probably more Choctaw than I am, but you have to be able to trace your lineage, and each generation has to have filed. And so we had significant papers basically. And so it's a little complicated, and it gets into a lot of affirmative action. So I don't know if we want to go there, but yeah, my very conservative family decided that affirmative action would benefit them and move that direction. So.
Very good. So I did not bias our audience by telling you things like why I thought this person might be an excellent addition to this panel discussion. But what I think is going to happen is that will emerge for you. Each of you will get tidbits as our panelists talk, and you'll say, okay, I see why these people were added to the mix, and I see how adding their perspective broadens the perspective of our combined audience. So I'm going to sneak down to the second row and ask Elder Francis, you're going to have to come off mute, sir. And I want to ask you, with what race do you identify? But what I really want to know is, what is your first recollection that race existed? Would you share? And you can tell us what race you identify, and then tell us what's your first recollection of race existing?
Okay. First, giving praises to my Heavenly Father for the.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask maybe Colin to send something in the chat that kind of helps Elder Charles with his technological challenge. And I'm going to skip across to the other side of the page. And then we'll come back to you, Elder, because I think your perspective is an interesting one that the audience needs to hear. How about we skip over to Dave Hill? Tell us about your background as it relates to the topic of how we learn racism. What would you say?
My background, I'm native Texan.
Okay.
I grew up in a small town in East Texas. And I think learning my race, I saw people on TV talking about being white and black, and I said, okay, I'm white. Later on, I've learned and still claim that I am a member of the human race. And I think in those terms today. I learned about race in what many people would call an interesting way. I'm the grandson of a Klansman, and my grandfather was racist and made no bones about it. He never tried to recruit me. He got out of the Klan about the time I was born. But I grew up in the midst of virulent racism, both in that small town that I won't name, and also hearing from my grandfather and other family members. I had to climb that mountain to be able to engage with my many friends of color. I now have probably more friends of color than I do that are white. It's been a challenge for me, but it's been a rewarding challenge too. Since 1994 in Round Rock, I have been the coordinator for the celebration for Dr. King every January. So mine is perhaps a strange story, but certainly a rewarding one. And I've grown spiritually so much because of the friends of color that I've made. They've educated me a lot, and we're very close friends, and I value those relationships. But it's been an interesting journey, to say the least.
Thank you for that. Wow. I asked, what could you tell us about your background? And you just nailed it in a couple of sentences. Wow. I'm dying to know, and I bet others are as well. Can you name a single event or a series of events that enabled you to move in the direction of unity, of appreciation for people of differences?
There was no single event. It was a process. I was born and raised conservative Protestant Christian. And at age 10, I began to notice some things about life in general. I heard one thing at home and another thing at school and another thing in public and another thing in church, so forth and so on. It was, for want of a better word, it was a cacophony of messages, very, very mixed messages. And I was taught as a child that if you pray about it and ask for help, and if you're honest, that God will hear you. So when I think I was 11 years old, and I asked God not for money or power, but rather to be shown, to be shown the answer to the questions that that cluttered my mind, how to sort all this out, all these different messages. And through my teen years, there were events that happened that led me to becoming a Baha'i. And even then there was a process. And I continue that process today. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a scientist, and I've always had a lot of curiosity, particularly about people. And as a kid, I probably asked more questions than I was supposed to. I had some grown-ups tell me I asked too many questions. So I didn't ask the questions aloud, but continued to ask them to myself. And I kept on seeking answers, and my faith helped me, but also my curiosity helped as well. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, beautifully done. Thank you so much for that. So now I don't know where to go. I obviously wrote down questions, but this is—
I didn't mean to confuse you.
Yeah, it blossomed into something magnificent already. Dr. Mia Moody, what's your perspective? And please, if you can, bring it to us from— I want to hear the science of it. What do you know from what you've read, from any research that you've done, from— I don't know. I don't want to lock you in. Go for it.
Okay, well, so I first of all identify as Black. Growing up, I grew up for the first 10 years of my life. I grew up in a Black neighborhood, predominantly Black neighborhood. So I really, first 10 years, I really didn't know much about race because we were the people that when I looked around me, everyone looked like me. We were all, Black. But then, of course, when I saw images on television, they were mostly of white people. And I can remember watching television shows and we would get excited whenever we saw Black people on TV. And of course, not all of those representations were positive. So that was when I began to, at an early age, began to notice the misrepresentations of people of color. And this, of course, extended, into my adult years. And that's what I study now. Um, as a researcher, I study representations of people of color. And as a scholar, much of my research has emphasized marginalized groups and how they are misrepresented on, television. And now I have transcended from books, radio, magazines, and now I'm actually looking at social media platforms. And then there have always been stereotypes of women and people of color on all of those platforms. And now they have actually, the misrepresentations have actually made their way onto social media platforms. And so it's just interesting at how people of color have always been misrepresented by the media. So that's how my when you ask about discipline and research and what we bring to the table as far as our background, that's what my research, that's what I bring to the table. I've always looked into those, the topic of misrepresentations of people of color.
Excellent. Wow. Wow. I love that. And you just kind of grounded us back to the actual science of it, the research
Yes.
associated. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So, Cheryl, I'm going to ask you to chime in on that in a minute, but let's go to Elder Charles Francis, because I think his perspective on this presents yet another nugget that will be important to our discussion. Why don't I tell you? He was grown when he found out that race existed and that he was Black. His family never made race an issue. Now they didn't grow up in a place where you wouldn't think they would discuss it. He grew up in the South. Okay, so there was plenty of opportunity for his family to make race an issue. They didn't. He grew up even in his early high school and probably junior high school. He grew up, and when things happen that normally we would say, aha, that's a race issue, he was oblivious to it. It didn't even occur to him that race was a factor. He has turned out to be, wow, a gentle giant. Oh my God, I can't say enough things about the way he perceives the world. And at first I thought, surely you're kidding me, because we are almost the exact same age to the month and date. So you would think that we would have had some similar kinds of experiences. The trouble is, he would see the cup as Kool-Aid, and I would see the cup as something other than Kool-Aid, okay? And so I love the way he views the world, and I hate that he can't share with you how he came to this, but the night is not over. So I'm gonna go to Mr. William Parks, and then we're gonna come back to Charles, because I think you need to hear his story. Cheryl, I said, I want to hear more about this research part. I want to hear more about the science. And you are the coordinator for outreach and inclusion associated with the Multicultural Affairs Department. What's that about? What do you do and what's going on with that?
Oh, that's a good question. Every day is a little different, but I work at Baylor University and I work in student life. So while I do get to teach a class or two here and there, primarily I'm in the part of the university that does what you might have remembered from college as the fun side that was sanctioned by the university, maybe I should say. So we do the student development work that happens through programming, through events, through student organizations, that sort of thing.
No, you said something. See, I'm from the 60s, and something that's sanctioned might be something that you don't inhale. So you got to say more about that.
That is fair. So for instance, my office, we work with putting on the Heritage Months. And so we specifically work through events, programs, both for faculty and staff and students. They're student run and university overseen for Hispanic Heritage Month. We actually do our Asian Pacific Islander Month in October, November, just because students are gone in May. Then we do our Black History Month and then Women's History Month, so February, March. So a lot of celebration. We also are responsible for reacting, it's not the word I want to use, responding and mediating to things that might happen on campus, but also helping students work through things that are happening in the world. And so even though, George Floyd's death was about almost 14 months ago to the day, so students weren't on campus, we were still available to them while they were, across the country, taking their emails, taking their phone calls, trying to, prepare for bringing them back to campus. So that maybe gives you a little picture of the job of just really helping students unpack their identities, because some students come in and they maybe, like Mr. Francis, really didn't have a lot of concept of their racial identity or social identity or socioeconomic identity, et cetera. And others who are very aware and they want to talk about it a lot, and they tend to clash with each other when they get to campus because they can't understand why do you not know more about this identity in yourself? And then really just trying to help students wherever they are in discovering who they are and what that means in a diverse society. And so for some, Baylor's the most diverse place they've ever been. And for others, it's the least diverse place they've ever been. And so how do you navigate that?
I want everybody on I don't want to ignore what you just said. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. That piece of information, I think, helps us understand how the perspectives are shaped on the Baylor campus. Shaped and reshaped, by the way. I think they show up with one point of view, and as time goes on, they're introduced and reseated in other points of view as well. So I think you must have a lot to do with that. And part of it is just flat listening to people from the beginning, rather than imparting or imposing your value systems on them. So it takes a certain kind of person to do that. And so hats off to you. So ladies and gentlemen, I really want to know what incident that is most vivid in your mind involving an interaction with a person of a different culture, a different race, you pick it. I don't know what you want to call it. I'm after differences here. An interaction you had with somebody that was very different than you, and how did that shape your impression of people of that culture or that race? Okay, so I'm after a single incident or incidents involving a person that was different than you. This could have been a person of a different race, a different culture, a different, significant different background. And I want to know, how did that, you must have gone into it with an opinion. This is a moth, this is a butterfly. And then after your interaction with the individual, how did that shape what you then saw in that person? Y'all with me now? Okay, yay, I got a nod. Let's go to Cheryl, and then we're gonna just move right through.
So this would give you my age, but I think that's okay. I was a freshman in college for a week before 9/11 happened. So very formative for me, but I grew up in North Dallas, which is rather diverse. In particular, there were quite a few so the Kashmir conflict in 1999, which between India and Pakistan, there was quite a influx of Pakistanis into the Dallas area. And so more conservative Christian groups, white evangelicals, and just white people in general had a lot of suspicion already of, we'll just say, brown people moving into the neighborhood that were building prayer centers. There was even a mosque, this sort of thing. And so I was coaching speech and debate. I had graduated, I was a debater in high school, and I had moved right into a position as an assistant in high school into college. And so majority of my team was young, 14, 15, 16-year-old Muslim Pakistani boys. And so, you know, I thought that I was open-minded and that I had, you know, the ability to just be their coach and not think these through. But I also realized I had some embedded stereotypes about having to watch them closer, that they might be more likely to steal, or that they were more likely to lie. I mean, just things that I'd been told. And what would happen is we'd go on these trips, is that we would inevitably hit Ramadan, right, at some point in the year. And I remember distinctly this one occasion, and I learned that they were doing these rounds. I mean, they were debating, they're standing on their feet for an hour and going into, you know, it's sundown and they haven't eaten. And dummy over here, and granted I'm 19, but still, you know, what do they have in cafeterias for high schoolers? It's like pizza and hot dogs, right? So what do? I grab them pepperoni pizza and some hot dogs. And they were so gracious.
Wow.
And they were like, it's okay. Our moms packed us food. They didn't razz me out. They didn't make me feel bad. And then one of the boys offered me half of his sandwich so that I could eat with them. And I was just so blown away that this, I mean, you know what 14 and 15-year-old boys are like. And he hadn't eaten all day, but he wanted to break fast with me. And I was like, screw the media, screw all of this. I don't buy it. I don't buy any of it. Because if this religion can get a 14-year-old to share their dinner when they haven't eaten all day and not make fun of their white 19-year-old teacher, like, there is something happening here.
So I think we need to carve out what you just said and play it over and over and over again. That is so meaningful. Thank you for sharing that.
Well,
wow. Mr. Hill, talk to us.
Two incidents are worth telling here. I'll be brief. When I was in middle school, we had recently integrated. I'm dating myself. I'm not a young man. There was this black kid that beat me up. And I thought black people were angry and violent. But I did make friends with some of the other black kids and came to realize that you just have to get to know a person. But it was still a very, very difficult time. Fast forward to the late 90s, I was invited to join the Round Rock Black History Organization. And there were, the group was predominantly black. And there was one person that berated me, you know, not even black, what's he doing here? But there were two older women that came to my defense, that spoke up for me. And I came to realize, you know, these relationships are just so important. I already knew one of them pretty well, and I got to know the other one. So it turned out to be a very rewarding thing. But those two incidents stand out in my mind.
Yeah, I can remember one of my pastors saying, "Everybody your color ain't your kind." And it's so wrong to relegate people to pigeonhole folks.
I'm self-taught on that, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Wow.
You want me to go back to the beginning, or what would you like me to chime in at?
Share your heart.
Okay, about race. I identify myself as a human. I always have. And I think it was because of my teaching from my parents. I do feel that racism is taught. It is not something that just comes out of you automatically. And so I had some great parents. My mom never mentioned a word about racism. My dad never mentioned a word about racism to me. We come from a small town. Some of you may know it. It's called San Angelo, Texas. And we had a few blacks there, but it was a small town, and it was never an issue. My parents never said a word about race to me. And so I didn't know about racism. We had a TV that showed sometime. That's back in the days where, you know, if you were lucky to have a TV, you could get some things on TV every now and then. And of course, those are the days that Martin Luther King, them were doing things, but it was on TV. In my world that I existed, TV was a fantasy world. It's like watching the soap operas. Some people can really get wrapped up into that stuff and they think it's real. But TV was just fantasy for me. Of course, I probably watched too many cartoons. But I didn't connect that until later on in life. So when I was young and growing up, there was no race. I was just, I guess you might say I was a dark-skinned person, but that was normal because everybody, for instance, has a fingerprint. Everybody's fingerprint is different, but everybody is different. So it's not a race card. It's just that, hey, genetics says you're darker than some people, and it didn't matter to me. I grew up in that kind of environment. And the first time that I now know that a racist something happened was when I integrated a white high school. And it didn't make a difference to me. I never thought about it. I didn't know that it was racism at the time. But I checked in. I was glad to go. I had already made a decision in the 7th grade that I wanted to be president of Central High School because it was a great school. My sisters and brother, there were 2 sisters and a brother that had gone there, and I wanted to be student body president. And I condensed it. In order to be student body president, I got to make more friends outside my circle. So I decided, and I talked to my parents. I said, listen, I want to go to Edison next year. Edison was just a few blocks from our house. Where I was going to a black school, there was 3 miles from my house. But I never thought about, why am I going to this black school and not to Edison? Until I said, I gotta expand my social base. So consequently, my mom, we were in the Edison school district. So she did the paperwork, sent me off to school. And I got there, and there was a lot of puzzlement on their faces, like, why are you here? I said, I'm going to come to the school where I can get to where I want to go. And I was there maybe a week, no more than 2 weeks, when they called me to the office and asked me to check out, and I would have to go back to Blackshear Junior High. And I didn't know what that was about. So I check out, I go home. My mama says, boy, what are you doing home? I said, they checked me out of school, mama, and said that I couldn't go there. I need to go back to Blackshear where I had gone before. And she told me, stay in the house. And she went away. Was gone for hours. I still don't know what's going on, though. See, I didn't understand it. She comes back home and she says, okay, now, on Monday, you're going back to school. And I said, okay, that's good. And so Monday, everybody says, I thought you were gone. I said, I did too, but I'm back. And so I was there. And in about 2 or 3 weeks, I checked out again. And when we checked out this time, we moved. We moved from San Angelo to Lubbock, Texas. Now, I have a strong faith in God, and he tells me, if you want something, you pray for it. And I was praying to be the president of San Angelo High School. But unfortunately, that wasn't for me to happen. So my parents packed us up and moved from San Angelo to Lubbock. I had integrated Edison, and then I had to check out. I moved to a junior high in Lubbock, and I was one of 9 people who integrated this high school. It was no big thing. I went to school, and then I had the opportunity to work on the new school that was built. I was on a committee, select the school colors. We wrote the school song. And I became vice president and then president of Estacada High School. God gave me all of that, and I still didn't know it was related to racism until I got in college. You see, so I looked at myself as being a human. I know in today's world, everybody wants you to identify yourself in a subculture under human. I often don't. I don't look at myself as being black, but I know that I am black. I know that. And I know racism does exist now. And I didn't know until college, though, that them not letting me go to school at Edison was a racist deal that was going on, and my parents never told me. They just up and moved. You see. So I identify myself as a human. How did you come to learn that race mattered? Wasn't until I got to college. And that's when all the things that were racist in the past, whether it was just subtle racism or blatant racism, I didn't know until I was in college. And that's when I started putting, oh, when that happened, that was a racist move, and I didn't know it. I didn't see it as racist because I didn't know about racism. So what's my first regulation of race? Really, It was a slap in the face in college. So I was grown. And I didn't know anything about racism out of our household until I left home. My parents actually, I feel, sheltered me from that, but because I didn't know about it.
Okay, so you led us right to where I'd like us to end tonight. There were three questions at the bottom of our thought process that have to do with where do we go from here. You've heard stories. I still haven't heard from William Parks. I don't know whether we've lost him, but one of the people in our audience said, "What are you teaching your children? What the people who come after us? What are you sharing with them?" And I think that fits in with this next set of questions that says, "What do you think has to be done to heal our community around the issues of race and racism? And is this a realistic goal?" Part of that is, what are we sharing with folks who come behind us? So is there a way that you guys can quickly answer that? What's got to be done? And if you can do it in terms of what you're telling your children, that would be great to know. Some of you are too young, I'm thinking, to have children, but what's got to be done to heal our nation and move forward? And
I
can it be?
can address. Do you want me to address that? I have 3 children, and two of my sons are still at home.
Okay, great.
And I'm teaching them that, you know, it's okay to speak up. And they actually participated in 2 of the Black Lives Matter protests in Waco this year. And it is important to be the change that you want to see. And so that's what we're teaching them, that, you know, it's not enough to want to see change and not do anything about it. I think it is important for them to see you be proactive and to actually give them the tools that they need to help foster change.
Excellent. Okay. Uh,
My
Mr. Hill,
children
you
are,
said that you were a part of a group, I think, that's focused on doing just that. Can you talk about what you think needs to be done to heal our community? Yeah, I mean, you said that you were with a group, and I think you called it Racial History or something to do. There's an organization in Round Rock that you were a part of.
Yeah, that's Round Rock Black History Organization.
Okay. Would you say that that group is in business to heal the community?
That's certainly among the goals.
Okay.
Their primary goal, and I share that goal. There's a lot of history about Black America that's just not known, and I think this nation needs to learn more about that and teach our children a more balanced view of race relations in America. As to what needs to be done to heal our community, I think the most important thing, we must come to understand our fundamental organic unity as a species. We must understand that unity, and then we must act on it. To me, the maladies we face regarding race relations, they're fundamentally spiritual. Most people think of this as a political issue. I think it's a spiritual issue with political consequences. The politics are the symptom, not the disease. And I think we have to come to understand our fundamental organic unity and act on that. As a practical matter, I think that what we really need here is relationships. We need to focus on relationships, particularly across the boundaries of race. Also religion, national origin, and God help us all across the boundaries of politics. But on race, these relationships, that's how I learned. You know, I came from a very racist background, and I learned learned about race through these relationships, and they're critical. When you have a relationship with someone, then you understand. And when you understand, you care. And when you care, you act. And when you act and your heart's in the right place, then the right things happen. I think relationships will be the building blocks of any worthwhile and durable solution when it comes to race. So I think we need to focus on relations. And just briefly, I think white America needs to sacrifice, particularly sacrifice their time to form these relationships. Some may have to sacrifice more, but there's spiritual growth that comes from sacrifice. And so sacrificing your time to help foster these relationships, I think, is a critical ingredient.
Wow, I can't think of anything more profound. Thank you for that. Now, I'm not going to ask any one person this question. I'm hoping that somebody will have the guts to step out there and take a stab at it. There are those of us who just don't have any connection whatsoever with anybody that doesn't look like us. The people I know, I start a sentence, they can finish it. How do we begin to reach across the break to people who haven't experienced necessarily what we've experienced, who don't look like us, don't sound like us, don't talk like us, don't have the benefit, not the benefit, don't have the background we've experienced? You said build relationships. What would be the one, what's something we could do to start that process? So who would be willing to take a stab at that? Yes, Cheryl.
I'll take a stab. I think there's some pre-work to be done if that's really where you're at, that you just haven't done it at all, particularly if you're in more of a power position. But one of the things that I would suggest, I actually was putting a couple of things in the chat to leave behind for our panelists or for our audience. So I will go ahead and put those there, but there's some articles that you can just look up free by Stacy Sinclair, who's done a lot of bias research and will help you look at, especially for children, like she was finding that bias at like adult levels at the age of 6 and on. And so what does that mean for starting with young children? And in some ways it's inevitable, but in other ways she then looks at, okay, what do we do then? Instead of just assuming, oh, our kids are fine. It's just, they don't have racism. The other is this work by Rhonda V. McGee, who I'm a huge proponent of. This book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, which looks a lot at yourself and your own biases, and to maybe do some personal work before you reach out and ask someone else to do work for you. But I would say in terms of, I'll put one other book in there too, but if you're saying, I don't want to read a book, I want to meet a person, there are certainly groups that facilitate those kinds of things. Waco Plenty is a great place to meet people, Leadership Plenty. Really any of our organizations that operate in Waco, some of our nonprofits would give you that opportunity. I'm working with just started up a business a couple months ago called Cardia House that works specifically moving away from our dualistic thinking of us versus them and facilitating workshops and trainings to get people together to have conversations and learn how to communicate differently and reframe around issues. And there's other groups like that are certainly willing to do that. So I think a little Google searching and some pre-work I think is important so that you don't just step into a situation. I'm very cautious about stepping into a situation where you may do more harm than good. So
excellent. Just excellent. I like the fact that we seem to be bringing the discussion back down to the individual, as opposed to, typically when I get in discussions like this, people want to take it to this systemic level and deal with it on a very, very broad scale. But you guys seem to be saying, here's what you ought to do as a person. I think it's incredible that you've taken this approach. So there's a question out here in the chat. I'm not going to ask a person, whoever who has the guts to do this attack, okay? Many prominent academics have concluded that racism in the United States was started deliberately for economic reasons by business interests in the late 1700s. I'm not directing this necessarily to those of you who've done specific research, but if you have some insight, here's the time to share it with us who really want to know. Do you know about this? And have any of your own insights on the notion of racism being deliberately engaged? Is that true, or is that a figment of our imagination? Are we passing along something that's has no basis in fact?
Mia, do you want to take that?
Oh, you said, do you want, oh.
I was just saying Mia wanted it.
I don't have any
Mia?
specific, I don't have any specific information regarding that. So I'd like to pass on that question.
The only thing I could think of that maybe this question's alluding to is the breaking up of class, because there's a lot of class that is underpinning into race. The deliberate portion, I'm not sure exactly where they're going with that and how long it stayed there, but if they're talking about capitalism, you could actually, Dr. Tran, who was on our last panel, just wrote a book about this. So you could, Dr. Jonathan Tran, so you could look out for his book. That would be my pitch.
So let's end with a personal statement. What can we do to influence healing and restoration? I don't know if you want to do it within your family or within your neighborhood, on your street, in your faith-based organization. What say you? What can you do? And then maybe you can say, oh, I can do that too. What say you?
It says, what can you do to heal our community? And bottom line is we have to have a change in our mindset. And I think if everybody goes back and build that relationship, that's a key point to it. But a key and a change in mindset is very important. And in my note, I just put a deal here that says, follow the Bible. And you're asking, is that a realistic goal? Yes. Just start digging into the Bible, and it tells you what we can do. Now, at the peak of healing and restoration, what does a community look like? Well, if the community would do unto others as you would have them do unto you, racism would go away. It would, because racism is established on economics. I'm a firm believer that is money and services are tied to racism. And so I think that's very true. So that's important. But if you want to remove it, just get everybody to do unto others as you would like for them to do unto you. And that's whether they're black, white, Cherokee, Indian, or whatever. If you take the color out of racism and everybody just treats everybody as their neighbor, and that's great, because in the Bible there's a parable that says, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And if you love your neighbor, you establish that relationship that you love your neighbor, then racism would go away. And you wouldn't think in colors. you think in individuals. I'm through.
Excellent. Any other thoughts on those lines? Yes,
Yeah.
David.
Um, a, a brief incident about how you can influence healing and restorative processes. I was at a meeting with some friends. It was a Baha'i meeting. And as luck would have it, I sat next to this woman who I knew previously. She was quite a bit older than me. She's black. And I asked her, I said, how would a guy like me, be able to foster good relations? You know my background. She knew me personally. And we probably had about a 5 or 10 minute conversation, but there's only one part of that conversation I remember. She looked me in the eye and she said, David, speak from the heart.
Wow.
Speak from the heart and you can connect. People, my own sense of it is that people can sense that. And that's what I've learned to do, particularly with my friends of color. And they can overlook my shortcomings as long as I speak from the heart. So I would suggest that for any of us, particularly white America, speak from the heart and you can connect.
Okay. Okay, thank you, all of you. Listen, we tried to ask some pretty real questions. We tried to not stay in the esoteric, but to really get down and say, what's the real deal here? What can we do? What's really going on? But what question do you wish I'd asked that you thought, surely they're going to talk about this? What were you hoping we'd bring out that we hadn't brought out yet, that our audience needs to hear?
I was thinking you might ask about the media.
Okay, say more. What the media, how does the media influence our opinions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we got some experts on the call for that one. What say you?
Me?
No. I think is it Mia that's the
Let's
expert?
let's get.
Well, yeah, definitely the media plays a huge role in how we view people from different groups and how we view women. So, and as I've told you all before, my research, that's what I primarily look at, is representation of women and people of color. And so historically, both women and people of color have been stereotyped by the mass media. First in books, then newspapers and television. And it continues. And now we see those same stereotypes on social media platforms. So much so that's why I became a scholar and decided to research this area. And I think in researching and writing about this topic, the more people become informed and the more they know about it, then maybe the less they will do it. And, once they're aware, knowledge is power. We bring these biases to the table based on our upbringing. We've all talked about how we grew up and the people we were around, where we went to school, our parents, the things our parents taught us. So we bring all of this baggage to the table. And so even as reporters have that, they bring that with them as reporters. And so when they go out and cover stories, that can have an impact on how they write about a topic, and it can have an influence on how they frame different issues. And so a lot of my research has looked into the framing of people of color. And I think as reporters have become more knowledgeable, they've tried to have to be less less biased in their framing of topics. And I think that's why this type of research is important. But definitely, the media plays an important role. And children, you talked about what we teach our children. Oftentimes, parents, it's not just what we teach our children, it's the messages that they get from the media. And then, of course, the messages they get from their peers. But yeah, they do consume a lot of media content. And so that is a concern. You know, what are they consuming and what are the messages that they're receiving from the media? So that's a good question. So thank you for asking that question.
For your response. I appreciate that. I see Joe online. Are you here to close us out, or might we ask a question about faith-based communities? We're top heavy in faith-based community on this call. And it occurs to me that we learn a lot about how we view ourselves and others sitting in the pew. Is the church doing due diligence in helping us face race and race issues and etc.? Are we doing the right thing? Uh-oh, stepped in a puddle there, didn't I?
I think some churches are, and then some churches aren't. I contend that there's not consistency across the board there. You know, it needs to be some consistency in that area. The one thing though I think could help, I don't know if I could get support from that though, would be delete the block on all forms that ask you what race you are. Now I know that they're doing this to gather statistical information, but all it does is feed racism. When you apply for a job, they should not care if you're white, black, Chicano, or whatever. So why have the block on there? What race are you? Take me as an individual, love me or not. But I think if we could eliminate those on forms, it would be a start. But you lose all kind of statistical data that you're trying to collect about the system. But that's just my 2 cents.
Good point. Really good point. I might even go so far as to say, stop saying the word. I mean, stop referring to ourselves as white or black or whatever. Just eliminate that. I mean, find another way to describe oneself. Now, I know I don't get any support for that. So,
oh yes, you do.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have met our goal, and that is that we've come away with greater insight, a broadened perspective. I love the fact that we brought in the research, that we brought in personal experience, that we've hit some of the perspectives that we have that are very diverse. I'd love to take this maybe the next step and then focus on where do we go from here. But I can't do that without first of all saying thank you to every last one of you for participating in this. I really, really appreciate you had guts, right? And it takes guts to have this discussion. Thank you so much for everything you brought to the table. Thank you, Joe, for allowing us to have this discussion, sponsored by the CRRC. And thank you, of course, to the audience that thought enough of this topic to sacrifice your time this evening to chime in and listen to our experts today. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to our president for any final words, unless any of you have final words. Any of our panelists?
Okay, so thank you, Shahrazad, for moderating this. This really is a fantastic panel of very competent and knowledgeable people. A couple of the things that really struck me tonight that very much fit with the philosophy and the mission of the Community Race Relations Coalition specifically are the focus on ourselves as individuals in looking inward when we ask not what can we do, but what can I do? very much a part of what the CRRC promotes. We are very much a heart-to-heart organization. The fact that the importance of relationships with individual people is so important was brought up by the panelists. And this is something that we at the Community Race Relations Coalition tout constantly. We must be purposeful, every one of us, about forming close friendships with people of other colors and cultures. If you don't have those relationships, as David Hill pointed out, you don't understand. One of the things that popped into my mind when we were talking tonight was a few years ago, one of the things that the Race Relations Coalition tries to do, not during the pandemic, unfortunately, but is what we call dinner and a movie. And we choose a movie with a racial or cultural theme, and then have dinner together while we're watching the film, and then we have a discussion. And in one of those situations, there was discussion from someone in the audience. It was a white man who stood up and said, you know, I'm okay with people of color, you know, in general, but I am afraid of young Black men. What do I do? And I had already kind of said too much that night, and so I didn't respond, and I let other people respond. And but I was dying to share the answer, because we with the Community Race Relations Coalition know the answer. And Dr. King, this is a quote I use all the time from Dr. King from years ago: men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other, and they don't know each other because they are separated from each other. The answer for that, sure I understand. The answer for that man that night is find young Black men and move toward them in every way. Open your heart to them in every way. These fears that we have of each other are really totally unfounded usually. And someone mentioned tonight that on the panel, you know, that sometimes people don't know where to start. It's very, very rare in this day and age that people, especially say in our own community, a city as large as Waco is, that you don't know anybody of another color and culture. I don't believe it. That's a very rare occurrence. Invite them into your home. Get to know people on a personal level, and you will have the relationships very quickly with people of other colors and cultures. And those relationships that David Hill was talking about will change everything for you. So again, we're going to encourage you to be purposeful about forming relationships and close friendships with other colors and cultures. If you want to know anything more about the CRRC, please feel free to get in touch with any of us, any of our board members. Go to the website, crrcwaco.org. Our board has just started meeting in July in person for the first time. July 1st was our first board meeting in person. And we are scheduled to have our first in-person large meeting on October 28th, 5:30 to 7:30. It's dinner and some kind of program, and this is going to center around commemoration and celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. It will be at St. Albans, and we'll let each of you know if you are on our mailing list the details as it gets closer. But our board is very excited to be meeting in person again, and really looking forward to that. So God willing, if it stays safe enough to meet in larger groups, that will be October 28th. Again, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for giving up your time and energy and thought that goes into this. And thank you to the audience members for attending and giving up your time. Take care, everyone.